Welcome to Whistler's Vital Signs, an initiative of the Community Foundation of Whistler that seeks to connect and engage our community as a means to gauge its overall vitality. Whistler's Vital Signs with your host, Kim Slater, starts now.
The focus of today's podcast is intercultural inclusion, which connects particularly with the following Sustainable Development Goals. Number 3, good health and well-being. Number 8, decent work and economic growth. Number 10, reduced inequalities. And 11, sustainable cities and communities. To explore the topic of intercultural inclusion, I'm here with Carol Stretch, Program Manager of Whistler Welcome Center, which offers a range of settlement services as well as some literacy programming and some new trainings around diversity and inclusion. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you.
Back in June 2019, you hosted a Vital Cafe called How Inclusive is Whistler Really? That really part leads me to think that maybe Whistler is not all that inclusive. But first we should back up, because inclusion can mean a lot of different things. What kind of inclusion was the focus of the Vital Cafe?
First of all, I just want to say the really was not meant to be a comment on the state. It was meant to be a question
Okay.
to the community, to help them think about it. It's a good question to ask people. If we say, how inclusive are we? What do we mean by that? So it's a good intro to thinking about, on the simplest level, inclusion means there's no exclusion. Well,
that makes sense.
On another level, it's about, so Adrienne Clarkson recently at a Global Forum for Inclusion said, it's about being able to live with the differences. So if we've got many differences, there's so diversity and inclusion are inextricably linked, and inclusion is being able to work together so that it works for all of us. Not that one group feels less able to participate, less able to be in there doing things.
I see. So what is the role of culture when we're talking about inclusion?
Well, culture is, we all have our culture. There's several levels to culture. We talk about culture with newcomers and immigrants a lot. When people come in to a new country, a new culture, very often they go through a process of, we call it culture shock, which can last years, and which can revisit them at any time. And I think it's important to understand really how deep culture goes. And so we come in, we see, those visible things, what people wear, how people speak. That's how people know my original culture. What food do we eat? What music do we hear? What art is there? Language is another one. Arts and cultures. But that's just the very tip of the iceberg. And what we find is, there's actually culture there. So that's that surface culture, and then there's deep culture. And deep culture is really, and it's programmed into us, and as of our mother's arms, at home, at school, and then later on at work. Deep culture is something that often people don't recognize until they're faced with another aspect of culture that is different. So it affects, the way that we communicate, our facial expressions, our gestures. What do we do when we greet people? What is polite, what isn't polite, what we consider polite or impolite. But it also, it goes, that's one bit. It goes down as far as notions of friendship. What is beauty? What is modesty? What is lying? What does leadership mean? And it's you think about our approaches to religion or marriage. What is the role of a mother and a father? How does the family work? These things go really deep.
Yeah, those are some really profound questions.
Some very, very profound questions. And so culture is really important because you get people from two different cultures who come together. Those deep things are going to, if they talk and they interact, they're going to come across differences.
So when we talk about intercultural inclusion, are we talking about sort of a space, a safe space for everyone to participate in community life?
Lovely quote that I have again from the 6 Degrees conference, which is it's about building a space where people can strengthen themselves, where they feel space.
Yes.
I like that one.
I like that too.
So that you can go there and you know that, it's not going to be critical. It's not going to be, you can be yourself. And so part of inclusion is allowing people to be themselves and to be recognized and respected, even if the way that perhaps they're expressing friendship or leadership is a little bit different from ours, that we understand that and we learn to live with that. Mm-hmm. And in fact grow from it, because isn't it interesting to try a different way?
Absolutely. Fascinating. From those differences, I think, comes a lot of creativity and potential for innovation. So thinking about Whistler and what is the dimensions of multiculturalism within the community of Whistler?
So Whistler, we've built many of the original people who settled in Whistler were not Canadian originally. But recently we've really been experiencing a huge influx in comparison to our population. So in 2016, per the census, 32% of our population were not born in Canada.
Okay.
32%. So 22% are immigrants. Now, that would be recent immigrants as well as longer-term immigrants. And then another 10% are temporary foreign workers. This is huge. If you look at Canada sits at about 4.5% immigrants overall. We're at 9.
Considerably
we're
higher
huge.
than the national average.
Yes.
Wow. So where are folks coming from? Do we see sort of diaspora in the community, or are we seeing sort of pockets of different...
It changes every year.
Okay.
It changes all the time. And a lot of what happens in the community is impacting on who's coming in. So I started working with immigrants and newcomers in 2008, so that's more than 10 years, before the Olympics. Before the Olympics, I would see lots of Japanese, almost entirely Japanese. What happened in the Olympics, and you would have to ask the hotels and the businesses what they did, but what we saw was them sponsoring in a lot of employees from other sites. And we saw a lot of Mexicans, a lot of Filipinos, quite a few from the Middle East coming in. And at the same time, moving people from somewhere else, a lot of those were a little bit older, a lot of them were married, a lot of them had families, and we started to have families coming in to the communities. That's changed the dynamic entirely in terms of it wasn't the young 24, 25-year-olds anymore. It was slightly more mature, it was the families, and there were children coming in.
So probably a different set of priorities and needs.
Very different. They're actually, and a lot of them were coming, they came because they want to settle in Canada. This was a long-term thing, and it continues to be what we're seeing right now. They want to settle their families here, and Whistler, needing the jobs, is a huge opportunity for them to do that. In the years since, the latest influx is Moroccans, and there are right now 50-odd Moroccan chefs that have come in since February this year, and another 15 due this month by the end of November. So
isn't that interesting?
It's huge, and we've just literally this morning been working in an information session with them, and most of them are planning to bring their families in, and they want to settle here with their families, their spouses.
Well, given this trend, and it seems like the growing interest in Whistler, you can see why this is a really important issue. You mentioned jobs and sort of the economic issues. Are there any other reasons why this is a really important issue to Whistler in particular?
I think that any community that has 33% of people who are born in another country needs to think about how we help those people be part of our community. And even if we think we're doing well, I think it's appropriate to sit and just ask some questions how do I feel about this? Do I know how many of these 33% of my contacts, newcomers to town, how many of them am I interfacing with? How many are my children interfacing with? I wonder, are there silos? Are there people who are saying, I don't meet these people? So I think we just need to ask some questions about how inclusive we are, how well are we working to make sure that they are included in the community, and the community uses that to build and grow.
Yeah, at the cafe, you said that the first thing we need to do is to be welcoming to our newcomers, and the second, inclusive. But why is this distinction important?
I think that the distinction is between saying, you're welcome to join us. Here we are. This is what we do. Come in and sit in one of the chairs. And it's another thing to say, I want to know about you. I want to know what you bring to the party. I want to try and understand. And, I know that you're moving to fit in, but I want to also to do something. It shouldn't be, it's something, somebody said, inclusion is not about just being aware of the diversity and the difference. It's actually about actively doing something to include somebody.
Right, engaging with that diversity, right, in different ways. So what kinds of barriers or special challenges do newcomers face?
Well, I have here something. The Canadian government's done some research on this, and the biggest one, interesting for Whistler, the biggest one across Canada was actually finding a job. I don't think that's an issue in Whistler, but I think maybe finding an appropriate job might be an issue. And finding a job that matches my prior skills. And we certainly have a lot of people, we have a lot of experience coming in. So that was an interesting one. Second one, learning a new language. And learning a new language is indelibly linked with culture. Getting used to the weather came in third. And that's a reality for lots of people who've come in. Filipino, I remember a question years ago. Somebody came in and said, I have to ask a question. Will rubber boots be enough for the winter? Just because you don't know. There's so much that you don't know. If you've always lived in a tropical country, how do you know how to dress for the winter?
Yeah, I think it's hard to deal with Canadian weather, even if you were born in Canada.
Yes, so times that by however many you want. Missing support from homeland is another one. And I know that we've talked about this in Whistler. Most people have come from somewhere else. But just missing that support from home is huge. It's one of the major reasons why groups tend to stick together, because they get it in their own group rather than from their family.
Right.
And then adapting to the new culture or values is a huge one. And there are a number of other things. So I think all of those actually apply in Whistler.
So in your work with the Whistler Welcome Center, maybe you can speak to some of the services that are offered that can help newcomers, and maybe also speaking to the sort of the unique sets of challenges that may be faced immediately upon arriving, and what services might be available to support that early moment, and then all the way through to folks who decide that they want to stay here, because I imagine there's different needs that happen over that time.
I think there are, but I think there are some that continue.
Right.
I think the nature of settlement and what we might call culture shock, which is that adaptation process, is that it never really ends. And so people can become comfortable in what they're doing and learn to live with that. And then maybe they enter a new sphere. They might find, okay, they'll have a child. Child goes to school. All of a sudden, we have to approach that again. So I think it's something that's circular. I think when people first come in, that culture shock, which a lot of which is about suddenly seeing differences in culture, questioning them, trying to find out how things work, and just coming to terms with how they work. So there's the practical things, which is literally, how do I get my MSP? How does it work? What does it pay for? All of that practical knowledge, which is obviously when people first come in, is important. But then there's the cultural adaptation. And we spend a lot of time with people talking about we hope to be a safe place where they can come and ask those questions. Very often people are worried. They don't want to ask a Canadian or their employer because they're worried that it might be judged as critical. They don't want to upset people. So one of the things that we can do is provide a place where they can go and ask those what they think might be stupid questions. If I do this, is this really bad? If I do this, how will people react? When you're in a new culture as an adult, you don't know, and you often have to be able to ask. Children can pick it up by osmosis often. Adults aren't so good at that.
So you offer some services in terms of knowledge sharing, so supporting folks in terms of answering their questions and maybe navigating some of these challenging Canadian systems.
Yeah.
Are there anything else in terms of provisioning around finding housing or employment or literacy, I think was mentioned?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the knowledge of the practical side would be what we term settlement services, and we're funded by the federal and provincial governments for that. And then we have a large focus on community connections, part of which is developing communication skills, life skills that can be used at work and used just to interact with people a little bit more effectively in the Canadian environment. In terms of things like housing, if I had the answer to housing, that would be wonderful. We refer people to other agencies in the community. That's a major part of what we do. So if a newcomer comes to us and they say, this is what we're looking at, these are some of our questions, some of those we might deal with ourselves, some of them very often we would refer out to another agency.
Well, that's a tremendous service, right? It's just connecting newcomers to all of the different service agencies that are here. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what can be done to foster inclusion, both at the community level, so maybe the policy realm, as well as the personal or interpersonal level. So let's start with, at the community level, what can be done to remove some of the barriers that you spoke about?
The core to me is, I would say three things. Awareness, so make sure we know how much diversity there is. I actually, and I don't know when it actually happened, but it's within the last year. If you look on the Muni website, it now says 50% of the increase in permanent population between 2011 and 2016 was due to immigration.
Wow.
Yes, and I think that's telling. I think that for a long time, I don't think people have really been aware of how much there is. I think in a mountain town like this, a lot of the immigrants and newcomers, the people who are living here, are invisible because we have so many visitors. People think I'm a visitor, so we're very invisible. So I think that's a huge step forward, is building that awareness. That's the first thing. Second thing, once we're aware, let's find out about it. Let's try and understand. Let's try and build our knowledge of, well, what does it mean? What does it mean if somebody is, let's say, from a more collectivist culture, and here they come to a very individualist culture? What does that mean in terms of how I'm going to work with other people, how I'm going to interact, how do we what does it mean, and how do I work with that person and live with that person so that it works for both of us? And then, of course, the third one is action. And I think action is basically curiosity. I would say ask questions. You come across somebody who's doing something that you find strange or different, or you think, the best question you can ask is, well, why? Why are they being like that? There's going to be a reason. People usually are running on their programming and they're doing something for a reason. So let's try and find out why.
Are there some supports to assist either businesses or individuals who are interested in discovering how they can engage with diversity, how they can promote these sort of safe spaces at the workplace, for example?
Well, this is something that we're we've started doing, and I do see it as a function of the Welcome Centre to be able to talk to Canadian locals as well as immigrants and newcomers, all locals, about these issues. It's something that most people don't query their own culture until they come up against another culture. And so we have recently developed a workshop, an introductory workshop, because it's a huge topic, on diversity and inclusion, and we look at specifically some case studies for Whistler and talk about how we can improve that, and that will be offered in November. So that's definitely something that people could sign up for.
Where would they sign up for that?
Well, I believe it'll be on the library website, so it's being offered through the library, and I believe that the website will open up, sign up will open up on like 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of November.
Okay, for everyone who's ready, waiting to sign up.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing that we are developing, and the first one of those will happen on the 6th of November, is a workshop specifically for employers, and we're looking at helping them actually build more successful teams where they're diverse. And we're looking at helping them through helping people work together, understanding how to help people work together a bit better, and also supporting them through that settlement, that first process, and immigration. And that you can sign up for at the Welcome Centre, and that will be on shortly by the end of the 28th of October.
Great. And the Welcome Centre, once again, is in the Whistler Library.
It's in the Whistler Library. The website is welcomewhistler.com. Please go there. We've just updated the website. We hope it's nice and easy to get around. Go to events and you'll find it there.
Well, that's great. One last thing, if folks are particularly interested in this topic, in addition to these trainings that you've mentioned, are there any other resources that they should check out? Books or websites or...
One thing that I would suggest is a resource. There was a book written on this a long time ago. There's now a website, which is hugely interesting, and I suggest it. So Hofstede is the name of the person. It was actually Hofstede's father and son, Hofstede. If you go to Hofstede Country Comparisons, as a first kind of toe in the water, you can go into that, you can put in some different countries, one or two, and you can compare some of the cultural dimensions. And it gives quite an extensive write-up, and you can see how those different, there's a span of 6 dimensions, and they've done some work measuring each country against those dimensions, and it's very interesting to see. They'll talk about how it impacts the workplace, but also interpersonal cultural communication. It's fascinating.
It does sound fascinating. I can't wait to check that out. Thank you so much. We're going to leave that there for now. Really appreciate coming in today and for all of your work in the community. Thanks so much.
And like all good things, this edition of Whistler's Vital Signs has come to an end. Please be sure to turn on your notifications and join us for our next installment. Whistler's Vital Signs is a podcast series developed to help distribute the facts and findings as contained in the annual Vital Signs Whistler Report and related programs. For more information on Whistler's Vital Signs, please visit the Community Foundation of Whistler online at whistlerfoundation.com. Whistler's Vital Signs podcasts are brought to you by the Vancouver Foundation, the Community Foundation of Whistler, and 101.5 Whistler FM.